Even if you went to the best business school in the world, nothing prepares you for the financial chaos of running a contingency law firm. But Jeff Kimmel figured it out, and he's sharing exactly what worked. All right, and we're here with Jeff Kimmel. Jeff, welcome to the show today.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here.
All right, and Jeff, you run a great firm in New York City, focused on PI and moving in a little bit into mass torts. Before we get into that, let me ask you a big question. You've got a great business background. I believe you went to the Wharton Business School, if I'm
I
not
did. I did.
mistaken.
Yes.
Yeah, but you said you still were not prepared for the business side of running a law firm. You learned that through your experience. Tell us a little bit about that. How is it possible that even business school didn't get you ready for all of this?
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, I was a Wharton undergrad, and that was a long time before I got to be in the firm that I'm in. You know, college was a great experience. The classes in the business school were terrific. But then I went to law school. And when I say I wasn't prepared, I'm talking about what I learned in law school.
Hmm.
Because obviously my focus shifted and I was 100% in on learning about the law. And honestly, my idea of law school was to prepare me for becoming a trial attorney. Because to me,
Hmm.
I went to law school thinking I was going to be a trial attorney. I didn't know that lawyers did much else, and that was what I was interested in. And
Okay.
so that's where I went. And then on graduation, once I graduated law school, I started working in the DA's office. So I was implementing in practice what I did learn in law school at that time. The rules
Hmm.
of evidence and all kinds of civil procedure and stuff like that. So law school did prepare me to be a lawyer. What it didn't prepare me was to be a business person and to be a
Hmm.
managing partner of a firm. And yes,
Hmm.
I'm leaning on stuff I learned in college, but it's far from practical what I learned way back then, to what I'm doing now.
Yeah, definitely. For our audience, tell us a little bit about your practice right now.
Yeah, so our practice, we've been around for, I don't know, 40 years plus, and it's a personal injury, medical malpractice plaintiff's practice. So we do specialize in med mal cases. We get a lot of referrals from lawyers who don't do malpractice but do personal injury because medical malpractice is a different kind of specialty. It requires a lot of money, a lot of time, and some expertise. So
Hmm.
it's the med mal stuff was a small percentage of the practice when we started, and now it's up to I'd say a third of the number of cases that we have, and probably 50% of the income comes from the med mal cases because just by their nature, they're higher value cases. They're more
Yeah.
expensive and more time consuming, but the payout is larger. And in New York, the fees actually are uh, guided by a sliding scale, which makes the fees less than the typical one third that you get in the general liability cases. So that's challenging, but it's still, even with that sliding scale, the med mal cases uh, are more valuable. And
Yeah.
in the last year, we've expanded. I've expanded with my marketing team and my intake team into mass torts.
Hmm.
So we are really at this point mostly referring mass tort cases. In other words, we have a great marketing team and intake team. We're generating leads. We're doing all kinds of social media, and we're getting potential cases, these leads. And we are keeping some, but for the most part, we're referring them out to the leadership firms in the different mass torts. It's been a real big education. It's been exciting for me. It's a new area of business, another stream of income for the firm. Hasn't been that
Yeah.
yet because it takes time for these cases to actually come to fruition. But we've signed
Yeah.
up a lot. We're learning a lot, and it's a very active part of the practice for me now. But
Hmm.
the lawyers in the firm are still doing personal injury and medical malpractice. They don't know much about what's going on in the mass tort world, but it's sort of like a side project I'm working on now within the firm to bring in more income.
So, Jeff, personal injury and medical malpractice firms operate completely different than hourly billing firms. You're essentially a pre-revenue business until those settlements come in. How has that contingency model kind of shaped the way that you think about managing the firm as a business?
Well, that's a great question. It's extremely challenging to run a business like this. The bills are not on a contingency basis. Those come in every month, every week, every day, as does the payroll.
Yeah,
So it takes a lot of planning, patience, and organization to figure that out. Our biggest lifeline is the line of credit we have at the bank to cover, what we need when we don't have the cash. The business is very, hills and valleys. We're flush with cash when we get a big settlement, and then there's a couple of weeks we go without a settlement, so we still have to pay bills, and that's what we use a line of credit for. The biggest challenge I found on this end is actually finding a bank that understands my business. And that
yeah,
has been very challenging. And I finally do have a bank that does, and it's not coincidentally called Esquire Bank.
hmm hmm
They understand lawyers, but I was through the regular banks, all of them at one point or another, and they really didn't understand what a contingency business is. I mean, of course, they understand the principle, but as far as banking
yeah,
goes, they would consider a case that I have settled for whatever amount, and if I didn't have the money within 3 or 4 months, then they would consider it a bad debt that I was never going to get it. And I'm like, wait a second. There's a Geico Insurance is paying. They're pretty good for the money, or whatever. These medical malpractice insurers who have
yeah,
minimal policies of $1 million. They give. There's a lot of requirements once a case is settled, especially if it's a wrongful death case or if it's an infant's case. Settling the case only starts the second process, which is getting approval from the courts or getting guardians and estates and all those things, played out and verified and all
hmm
this stuff. So oftentimes in those cases, it can take up to a year to get the money. And when the
hmm
bank would see something on the books that's, 4, 5, 6, 8 months old, they say, you're never getting that money. Or that was what they're trying to think,
yeah,
and so
yeah,
they wouldn't count it as an asset, and they're like, well, we can't, we're not giving you money for your line. You're not paying, you're not getting money for your settlements. So, and that process repeated itself over and over with each bank that I went to. And, I'd have certain people in the bank, and some they would understand, but then they have to go up to their bosses. So it's challenging, but all it does, it takes a lot of planning and discipline to put the money in the right spot and make sure you have it when you need it. And, the last option is a line of credit, but that's often what we go to.
yeah. I'm curious. It can be tax advantageous to, finance cases. So that's a great option. Do you use that option frequently? Do you tend to, or do you prefer to self-fund cases when you can? How do you like to approach that?
Yeah, we don't use outside funding for litigation costs. We do it ourselves. That's really what the line of credit in my firm. That's what we use it for. Because
Hmm
we have to lay out the expenses. Ultimately, that's what we see as what we use to fund the cases going forward.
Yeah.
There are times where we need money to pay payroll, but really it's a lifeline for us to fund the cases, especially the medical malpractice cases are very expensive. You can't start a lawsuit in New York without an affidavit from the lawyer saying, I swear I spoke to a doctor and who confirms that I have a case. And that conversation with the doctor is expensive because they charge for their
hmm
time. So I call the doctor, I send the records to the doctor reviews the records and then gives me the opinion. This is all before the case even starts. So
hmm
I'm spending a lot of money, and sometimes the review comes back negative. And so now I've spent all this money and I'm not getting that back. So, these are the kinds of expenses we have, and that's the cost of doing business, and that's all good. and we can afford to do that, thankfully. But that's really what I use the line of credit for.
Okay, makes sense. Now you mentioned planning. I'm glad you brought that up. How do you approach the planning side of things? 'Cause that's really key, forecasting things out, making sure you have a runway. What is your approach to that?
Well, it's sort of like we set up baskets. When the checks come in, we don't just put it all in payroll. We try to forecast, okay, where are we going to need this money? We put some of it in payroll. We put some of it aside for taxes. We do know that we're paying quarterly taxes. So we've opened up separate bank accounts that have the names of what you're trying to save for to make it, painfully obvious. And we try to be disciplined enough to put that money in there. And of course, it's tempting when we're a little short on cash to go into that tax account because we don't have the tax payment for another 2 months. But there's a bunch of money in there. Should we go into that and take it out and say, okay, when the next check comes in, we'll refund the taxes? That tax bill is going to have to be paid. When we do that court,
Yeah.
it's always a decision to be made, but we
Yeah.
do have a good idea of where we want the money to go, and we put it there. The challenge is when we're short on cash, and like, okay, so where do we take it from? Do we go to the line? Do we go to one of these? I call them baskets that we put aside for payroll, for taxes, for other things. We do a lot of events with the firm. We do team building events and we have them throughout the year. So we put a separate fund away for those so we can enjoy ourselves and everybody can have fun. So we have different money in different baskets and, we try not to take from the baskets, to pay the other basket.
All right, Jeff. So it sounds like you've taken some of the lessons from Profit First. Maybe you did that already intuitively, but you're familiar with the Profit First system. You've read the book. But when we talked about it before, you mentioned that it didn't quite work exactly cleanly for your particular business model. What did you find that worked? What didn't? And how did you make it different?
Yeah, it's a great book, and it certainly validated the basket thing I've been doing, but I used the book and the advice there to refine that and to make it even better. And they added some things that were great ideas. But when it came to the owner's stuff, like the draws and the salaries. So it's not just me. I have a partner, and we have our own way of dividing things up, and we have our own accounting, and we have certain things that we count as draws, that we count as salary, and it didn't really mesh with how the book was explaining how to calculate those figures to tie in with the
Mm.
whole profit first thing. So it would have been a big exercise for me to change, our accounting principles to match what was going on in the book, but it's still a very helpful book. It helped me, become organized, and I think it's terrific.
Yeah, and one of the things you've implemented is a regular partner draw, as I understand, making sure that you and your partner get paid on a consistent cadence, rather than, waiting for checks to show up when settlements come in. How transformative was that shift for you?
That was a big deal. That was a big deal because we had up to a certain point, and it tied in with the growth of the firm. So when it was a smaller operation, it was easier to just, manipulate things in real time. But as we grew, it became more and more difficult. So, with my partner and I, instead of having this uncertainty of when we'll be able to when will we be able to take draws and when won't we, and when, so it became uh, more advantageous for us to have certainty with that. And so, we
Yeah,
decided what to do, and we took it as we're going to be salaried, even though it's not really salaried, but we were going to be part of the biweekly payroll, and
yeah,
it smoothed things out for us professionally and more important personally. To know that
mhm.
we have bills to pay too, and it made it much easier for us going forward that way.
Yes. Thank you for being an advocate of that because that's one of the things I advocate for, with every client that we work with, and I find that it's often rare. that law firm owners are paying themselves on a regular cadence, but it does make such a huge difference both for the business and personally. You're right. You've got bills to pay. You've
Yeah.
got, savings you want to save, you want to invest, you want to, do all kinds of things. So that's a huge, huge shift. And one of the biggest hires that you've made in recent years wasn't another attorney, it was a director of operations,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
What was the tipping point that led you there, and what does that person do for your firm?
Well, it's a lot, and that person has filled a void or taken over the responsibilities from me. She was hired really to help me run the firm,
Hmm.
because as managing partner, the firm was growing, and I was involved in a lot of different things, and I needed help, honestly. And she was someone who came from a position that was one of running a firm or overseeing, the finances and the human resources, and she knew about bookkeeping and all these things. And all those were now new topics for me, new responsibilities for me when I became the managing partner, which I wasn't really ready for. I didn't, ask for that job. It just happened, and I do love it now. But bringing her on has honestly made my life a lot easier. And so she's involved in everything, pretty much that I do, and mostly what I don't want to do. And so she's very involved in every aspect of the business, and it's just great to have someone who can focus all her attention on these particular items, and I can still then get involved in the cases. Work with the
Hmm.
attorneys, be involved with case strategies and talk to clients, and not think that I'm missing out and I'm not taking care of the business. So it was a great hire for me, a great hire for the firm, and she's only been here for a year. This is a recent thing. So this first year has been a big transition, for everybody in the firm, because she
Hmm.
came in and no, we didn't have someone in this position. We really didn't have a designated office manager, really. And now office manager means a lot of different things, and it's unique to every firm. So, that was, we have an office manager, but it wasn't a director of operations with all the finances and all the other human resource
Yeah.
items. We had an outside human resource consultant who we no longer really have to use, because the director of operations is really handling a lot of the personnel issues and hiring and firing and all compliance stuff. So she's wearing a lot of hats that I gladly took off and gave to her, and it's worked. She's terrific, and it was a transition for everybody in the firm to see these things coming from someone else besides me. Um, but we're past all that, and she's terrific.
That's great. Yeah, that's a really big step. And one of the key areas I'm sure that she's able to help you with, and one of the key areas of profit first, there's a lot of when everyone thinks profit first, they think of the buckets, and that's the starting point. But really, it's about becoming more profitable. And as we learn later in the book, one of the biggest keys to that is being more efficient and driving efficiency in your practice. How have you been thinking about, efficiency, especially in the new age of AI and, trying to get things done more quickly and more cost effectively? What are some things you're doing along the lines of efficiency these days?
Yeah, so a very exciting time for me now with AI and all the options that's uh, providing, and all the changes. So really, what I've devoted myself to over the last year or so is to be better at data and analytics. So
Mm-hmm.
we have a case management software. We also use HubSpot for the intake and marketing team.
Okay.
So we have these two major systems, and the truth is, I have not been focused enough on the data that's provided from both of these sources. And we've been with the case management software forever. And the problem with the case management software is that it's a great program, but everybody in the firm uses it differently. And
Mm.
if you're gonna get data, if you're gonna use data to make business decisions, it's got to be accurate. And right now, it's not. It's not. And so what I've been working, we're now at the end of our term with this case management software, and we're going to a new one. But it's actually the
Hmm.
upgraded version of this one. So it's going to be a smoother transition. But I am, focused, super focused on when this is brought into the firm, and it will be done, this calendar year. We're going to make this, transition. Um, that going forward, we are going to have everybody using it the same way. And we're going to have
Hmm.
some, I'm instituting some sort of quality control where there's going to be oversight, immediate oversight over how people are using it and essentially what box they're putting the data in, and that
Yeah.
everybody's using the same boxes for the same data. And then because what these programs now can do with AI, it's unbelievable. Even it didn't you don't need AI for this kind of stuff, but that data, I believe, is going to help me make much better decisions and be much more efficient, to answer your question, with how I run a
Hmm.
business, so I can see what's making us money, what's not making us money, why are we moving cases, why aren't we moving cases, where are the log jams, where do we need to be better, where do we need to put in safeguards, more quality control. And right
Hmm.
now I'm sort of spitballing it, but something goes wrong and I'm like, oh, we got to fix that, and then we got to implement a new protocol. But it's just, putting out fires. um i
Yeah.
I haven't done it, but what I was going to say is I'm a big proponent of it, but I haven't implemented it. But what I'm doing is educating myself, watching all kinds of videos, and learning, what are the metrics that I need? What is the data that will help me most? And this is now it's in two different businesses, because I'm going to also need to do it for the mass tort stuff, where I'm doing marketing and spending money on
Yeah.
advertising. So that's going to help me decide, okay, which mass torts am I going to put the money behind? Or
Hmm.
which am I going to use my advertising budget for it, and what should the advertising budget be, and all that. It's going to be a different set of data and metrics, but I need to be guided by something other than my gut intuition on where should I be spending money. And
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm really focused on getting those metrics and then implementing them and then seeing it and understanding it and being guided by that. I'm a logical guy, so it's much better for me to say I'm making this decision based on something, based on some empirical evidence or something other than, a feeling. And so I'm looking forward to it. I'm doing a lot of pre work to get there. So we're not there yet, but I'm really excited, learning all this stuff, because I see it works. It's in real business. I'm watching a lot of marketing stuff because of the mass tort stuff. This is how they make decisions.
Hmm.
It's pretty easy when you have the right metrics. This is working. This ain't working. Let's do this. Let's stop this. So, I love the thought of that. I love being able to do that for the marketing. I love being able to do it for the PI, for the med mal, for the legal work as well.
I love it. Yeah, data is well, cash is king. I don't know what you would call data.
Queen, we'll
It
call
might
it Queen.
be queen. Yeah. Um, you've got to make data informed decisions, especially in the marketing area, which is an area where so many firms waste so much money just by not knowing what is working and what is not working. And if you start there, you will really be so far ahead.
Yeah, and the truth is, we've never marketed, and my firm, I took over this firm from two guys who passed away, who were like titans in the industry, and if you would have said the word marketing to them, they would have just cringed, right? It wasn't a thing for them. It wasn't a thing for their generation, and our firm was really built on referrals, not marketing, and we never
Yeah.
had any kind of lead generation or anything like that. Only recently, with the marketing team that we have and the idea of mass torts, have we started doing that for mass torts, and doing it for the general business itself. We haven't done paid ads for personal injury. I mean, I'm not competing in the car accident space, with Morgan and Morgan. It's
Yeah.
not a thing. But for the mass torts, I am. But we are also doing social media stuff for personal injury and med mal, and we are getting,
Mhm.
cases, organically, from our
Yeah.
efforts, and from, how the marketing team has changed the website for the SEO, and that's where all this stuff is changing with the algorithms and whatnot. but we have a terrific marketing team, and we're getting these leads without having to pay for them. But they're doing a lot of work on the website and doing a lot of posting on social media. I'm doing videos. All of a sudden we're talking about a podcast.
Yeah.
So all these things, and it's fun. It's fun, but it's important.
That's great. And I just want to pause there, because for our listeners, right? You heard it. You heard it. Jeff said, up to this point recently, the business has run very well on referrals. And I suspect that'll continue to be the case, even with marketing. And I think marketing is really important to do those things like social media and your website, and that's all very critical. But referrals are really the lifeblood of any business. And that's a message we've been really hammering. So that's good to hear. And I also love to hear that you're getting great results without having to spend a lot of money. And I think so many law firms think they need to spend a lot of money and are spending a lot of money, spending gobs of money on Google ads and things like that. And you can do a lot with organic stuff. So something's working really well for you. That's great.
Well, yeah. So I did spend the money, but I spent it on good marketing people, and that's an investment that pays a lot back.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Jeff, you also have a book that you've written. I want to ask you a little bit about that. In your book, you talk about how profitability and happiness are not in conflict, that you can run a successful business without letting it consume your life. For law firm owners who feel like those two are in tension, what would you tell them?
Yeah, you have to work on yourself first. It's most important that you're happy. You can't be happy and make people around you happy unless you're happy first. And that comes really from my wife, who has her own business, and it's called Start Loving Life, of all things. And I've learned a lot from her. And the book came about during COVID, and we had nothing else to do because we were home and nothing was open. So I had been thinking about writing a book because I had recently, within a couple of years from COVID, become the managing partner, and I was learning that I didn't know how to do any of this. I wasn't taught any of it in law school, and I thought it'd be a useful tool, mostly for law students, but also for young attorneys, to know something about the business end of law and what it is to run a firm, and what the business of law really is, what it looks like, and how it really can make you a better lawyer and even a better employee if you know what the boss is looking for and what the
Hmm.
boss is facing. And it's not necessarily obvious to associates what's going on, in the room with the accountant when you're discussing finances. So that was my
Yeah.
thought and my idea, and I started writing the book. And with each chapter, I would run it by her and say, "What do you think?" And she came back and said, "It's good what you're writing, but you really have to have a mindset to be successful in that." I'm like, "Well, okay, well, you write it. You write that then." So she's like, "Okay, So then, and I was kidding, but so she did write some. She did write something, and I'm like, "Wow, well, that's pretty good." And then I wrote another chapter, and I'm like, "What do you think of this?" She goes, "Yeah, but you need to have the right mindset for that." I said, "All right, you write the book, I'll write so what we did was we decided for every chapter, I wrote the stuff that lawyers really want to know. And then she wrote how you have to have the right mindset for that particular skill or asset or whatever. And so every chapter is written by me and then by her. And that's the message, is that you can learn how to run a firm, you can learn how to be a good business person and a lawyer, but you're not really going to be happy unless you're in the right mind space, and unless you wake up
Yeah.
every day and be happy that you're alive, and for your what you do, and appreciate yourself and appreciate what you have. And it's something you have to actually work on and practice, and that's what she teaches people in the way she lives. And she has clients that she talks to, and she does life coaching, and she has a brand and all these things, and everything's pink. That's her color. So if you came to my house, you'd be like, "Oh, this is a pink house." But you know what? She's happy. I'm happy, and it is a great message, and that's really what the book is about. So it's got two aspects to it.
That's very cool. Well, we will make sure we link that in the show notes for everybody so you can check out Jeff's book. And Jeff will get all of your information as well, your website and all of that good stuff in the show notes also. It's been great having you on the show today. Thanks for joining us.
I want to mention your book, Darren. I loved your book.
Oh, great.
I have it here, The Lawyer Millionaire. I recently read it, when we first met and started talking. But I do want to tell you, I personally went through some stuff financially where I wanted to educate myself. And this
Hmm.
this is many years ago. And when I was talking about investments and financial advisors and stuff like that, and I said I needed to really understand this better myself because I was just trusting people. And so I,
Yeah,
I did read a bunch of books and I came up on my own philosophy about, financial advisors, fees, expense ratios, all these things about how to be smart with money. And it all
yeah,
and I wrote I believe in exchange traded funds is all I invest in really. And I read a whole
great.
a whole book on that, and that's because of the fees and the expense ratios and all that stuff. Um, and I really read a lot of books and learned a lot. And when I read your book, it just reminded me of all the other books I read. And I'm not just blowing smoke here. You really covered all the topics that I read in many books. They were all in your book. I'm serious. And I can't express enough how important it is for lawyers to have a handle on finances. I mean, personally,
Yeah.
everybody should, but lawyers in particular seem to be bad at it. Because they're sort of not worried about that; they're worried about other things. 'Cause they got important things
Hmm.
to. But this is just as important. And I just want to say you did a great job explaining it in plain language that's understandable. But the concepts really are that you go into a good amount of detail that you really do understand all these concepts. And kudos to you. Great job on your book. I recommend it highly.
Well, thank you so much, Jeff. I really appreciate that. And I've been told it's light on fluff, it's heavy on substance. So we will definitely make sure that's down in the show notes for you as well. You can pick that up at the ABA or on Amazon. So,
Excellent.
well, great. Thank you so much, Jeff, and thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you, Darren. It was a pleasure.
A huge thank you to Jeff Kimmel for joining us today. You can find Jeff and his firm online, and make sure to check the show notes for links to his website and his book, which is a must read for any law firm owner who wants to build a thriving practice without losing themselves in the process. The Wharton angle really gets me because I hear this all the time from law firm owners who have every credential in the world, but still feel like they're winging it when it comes to the business side. In fact, so many lawyers talk about how law school doesn't teach you about business. Well, guess what? Neither does business school. The truth is, no degree prepares you for the volatility of business, especially a contingency practice. And that's why conversations like this one matter. Here at the Lawyer Millionaire, we work specifically with law firm owners who are great at practicing law, but want to get just as good at business and building wealth. Whether it's smoothing out that contingency cash flow, making sure you're paying yourself consistently, or connecting your firm's profitability to your personal financial picture, that is the work that we do every single day with law firm owners just like you. And if you're tired of waiting for the next big settlement to finally feel financially secure, now's the time to change that. I'm opening up a handful of intro calls for law firm owners who are ready to build a real wealth strategy around their firm. Head over to lawyermillionaire.com and grab your spot before they're gone. Well, that's it for today, friend. And remember, if your law firm isn't building you wealth and freedom, what the hell are you doing? Can I get an amen? I'll see you next time.